I want you to try and think back to a very specific moment in your life.
Well, this should be good.
Right. Picture a time when you were in an argument. And it could be anything. Maybe it was with a partner over something completely trivial, or maybe a coworker about a project.
Or just some random person in a comment section on the internet.
Yes, exactly. The classic internet debate. But the point is, in this moment, you were absolutely, unequivocally certain that you were correct. Like, you had all your facts lined up perfectly.
You were just waiting to drop the mic.
Totally ready to deliver that final crushing blow to just win the debate. And then suddenly they present a piece of evidence that makes you realize you are completely 100% wrong.
Oh, man.
Yeah. I want you to think about how that moment actually felt. And I don't mean in your mind. I mean physically, like in your body.
It is... It's a highly specific physiological sensation, isn't it? Like the floor just sort of drops out from under you.
Exactly.
The blood rushes to your face, your heart rate spikes, and, there's this really noticeable, almost uncomfortable tightness right in your chest.
It is visceral. Like, we instinctively just hate that feeling. And that universal dread of being incorrect, the sheer physical discomfort of it, is exactly what we're exploring in today's deep dive.
It's such a fascinating topic.
It really is. So we are looking at this really compelling excerpt from a larger work called The Time Traveler's Paradox. And specifically, we're diving into a section titled The Humility to be Wrong, which centers around this dialogue between two figures named Nick and Maya.
Right, and they really get into the weeds of this.
They do. So our mission today is to figure out why human beings fight so fiercely against admitting error, and, more importantly, how rethinking our relationship with being wrong could actually transform everything from our own personal growth all the way up to, honestly, the survival of global civilization.
High stakes.
Very high stakes. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because if this were just, a bad habit or some quirky character flaw, only some of us would experience it, right?
But we all do.
Exactly. The fact that every single person feels that same chest-tightening dread means we aren't just dealing with stubbornness here. We are dealing with biology.
Yeah, we're looking at a fundamental neurological mechanism. The source material brings in some really illuminating neuroscience to explain this whole phenomenon.
Which I loved.
Yeah, it's wild. Because when we experience that terrible feeling of being proven wrong, it's not just a bruised ego. The text explains that when we are presented with evidence that completely contradicts a deeply held belief, this very specific region of the brain activates.
Right. The, what was it called?
The anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC?
The ACC. So the ACC is essentially the brain's internal error detection system.
Basically, yeah.
But the fact that it makes us feel physically sick suggests, it's doing a lot more than just flagging a typo in our mental spreadsheet, right?
Oh, absolutely. That is the core of the issue right there.
Yeah.
The anterior cingulate cortex is closely tied to our autonomic nervous system.
Okay.
And our threat response pathways. So to really understand why being wrong physically hurts us, we had to look back at our evolutionary history.
Like hunter-gatherer days.
Exactly. Thousands of years ago, human survival depended entirely on tribal cohesion. If you were wrong about a vital piece of information, say like which berries were poisonous or, where the predator was hiding.
You didn't just lose a debate.
No, you died. Or, almost as bad, you were cast out of the tribe, which essentially also meant death.
So the brain evolved to treat like a philosophical disagreement with the exact same severity as a physical threat.
It literally floods our system with cortisol and adrenaline. Because, historically speaking, social rejection or just losing face in front of the tribe was a life-or-death situation.
Wow, so it's not a metaphor.
Not at all. The brain uses the exact same neural pain pathways for social and psychological threats as it does for physical injuries.
That is insane.
Right. The activation of the ACC feels physically uncomfortable because your brain is trying to force you to pay attention to a threat. It treats being wrong as a direct attack on your identity and your safety.
Okay, if I can jump in with an analogy here, because this really struck me. It sounds exactly like touching a hot stove.
Oh, yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Because think about it. When you accidentally put your hand on a hot burner, you don't consciously stand there and think, the temperature of this surface is damaging my cellular tissue. I should probably remove my hand.
Right, you'd be severely burned if you waited for that.
Exactly. Your body reflexively flinches away from the heat to avoid physical damage. It happens before your conscious mind even processes the pain.
Yeah, it's purely automatic.
And what the neuroscience in the text suggests is that our brain has developed essentially a similar reflex for our beliefs. Just as we physically flinch away from a hot stove to avoid physical damage, our brain reflexively flinches away from being wrong to avoid psychological damage.
Yes. And that mental flinching is the root of what psychologists call cognitive dissonance,
Right.
which the source material points out is one of the most powerful and honestly destructive forces in human psychology.
Because it completely overrides logic.
Entirely. When the brain experiences that painful discomfort in the ACC, its default response is absolutely not to calmly update its false belief. I mean, that would mean accepting the pain.
It would mean keeping your hand on the hot stove.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to avoid that pain, the brain will quite literally bend reality.
It's wild what we'll convince ourselves of.
It really is.
Yeah.
To resolve the discomfort, the brain will dismiss the new evidence entirely. Or it'll attack the character of the messenger who brought the evidence. Or, and this is the craziest part, it will construct these incredibly elaborate fictional narratives just to preserve the original belief.
Did they give an example of that?
Yeah, a classic psychological illustration of this is observing groups who predict the end of the world.
Oh, like doomsday cults.
Exactly. When the chosen date arrives and, the world doesn't end, the group almost never admits they were wrong.
Which you'd think would be the logical conclusion. Hey, we're still here. I guess the math was wrong.
You would think. But instead, they convince themselves that their fervent prayers actually saved the world.
No way.
Yeah. They create an alternate reality where they are still the heroes just to make that neurochemical pain stop.
That dynamic provides just a startling explanation for something that frankly baffles all of us on a daily basis. I mean, it explains why incredibly intelligent people can hold on to completely false beliefs with such astonishing tenacity.
We see it all the time.
Right. You look at them and think they must be foolish to ignore the facts right in front of them. But the text gives us the actual underlying mechanism. Admitting error feels, on a neurological level, like dying.
Yeah. Their brain is actively defending its own existence. And actually, the phrase admitting error feels like dying is used explicitly in the dialogue between Nick and Maya.
It is such a powerful phrase.
Because when your identity is completely tethered to a specific worldview, the death of that worldview feels indistinguishable from actual physical death to your primitive brain.
Okay, but this is kind of bleak, right? Because if society conditioned this fear into us, logic suggests we can condition it out. But frankly, if we are fighting against a hardwired biological alarm bell that treats error like a mortal threat, I mean, it sounds like we are doomed to be stubborn forever.
It does sound a bit hopeless at first glance.
Untangling decades of tying our self-worth to being correct just seems nearly impossible.
Well, this is where the conversation in the text takes a really crucial turn toward psychology.
Okay.
While the brain is biologically wired to detect the error and fire the alarm, the fear of that alarm is actually a learned behavior.
Really?
Yeah, the source introduces the blank slate theory to illustrate this distinction. We are not born terrified of making mistakes.
Oh, that makes sense. Like if you watch a toddler learning to walk, they fall down constantly.
Right, over and over again.
They make the physical error of losing their balance just constantly. And they feel the physical sensation of hitting the floor, but they don't experience like existential dread when they fall. They just get back up.
Exactly. They haven't learned to attach moral weight to the error yet. The text explains that the paralyzing fear of being wrong is deeply conditioned into us as we grow up.
By who?
Largely by our educational systems and our parents. We teach children this very dangerous linear equation. We teach them that mistakes result in bad grades or reprimands, which means mistakes equal failure.
Right, the red pen on the test.
Exactly. Then we teach them that failure equals inadequacy. And finally, that inadequacy means there is something inherently fundamentally flawed with them as a person.
Wow. So we take a totally neutral data point, just an error in judgment or the lack of information, and we weaponize it into a character judgment.
Precisely. So by the time we enter the adult workforce or, political discourse, making a mistake doesn't just mean our spreadsheet was off. It means we are stupid or worthless.
We attach our entire self-worth to the concept of being right.
Yes. And the solution presented in the text relies on dismantling that equation by developing a growth mindset.
Which starts young, presumably.
It begins entirely with how we condition the next generation. If children are praised for their innate intelligence if they are constantly told they are just smart, they become terrified of making a mistake.
Because a single failure destroys their whole identity as a smart person.
Exactly. However, if they are praised for their effort and their resilience, they learn to separate their identity from the outcome. Errors just simply become a necessary temporary stepping stone on the path of gathering better information.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because as much as the growth mindset is a beautiful concept in a classroom, I find myself agreeing with the pushback offered by the character Maya in the source material.
Ah, yeah, Maya makes a very strong point here.
She does. She points out that the real world demands conviction. Like, if you are about to undergo surgery and your surgeon looks at you and says, well, I might be entirely wrong about where to make this incision, I mean, you are going to jump right off the operating table.
You would run out of the room.
A leader who stands in front of their company and constantly second guesses their own strategy, they don't inspire confidence. So doesn't society need certainty just to function? We can't walk around in a state of perpetual indecision.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the text provides a really brilliant clarification regarding Maya's concern. The philosophical goal being advocated here is absolutely not perpetual indecision.
Okay.
Conviction is absolutely necessary to lead, to operate, to build anything. The true goal is the willingness to revise that conviction the very moment better evidence appears.
Ah, I see.
It is about separating your ego from your current hypothesis.
So it isn't about avoiding decisions. It's about how gracefully you adapt when the decision yields a poor result.
Exactly. And the text contrasts two completely different human endeavors to illustrate how this plays out at a macro level. Science and politics.
Ah, that's a good comparison.
Science is held up as the greatest human achievement in terms of our willingness to revise. The source points out that the most celebrated scientists in history aren't revered because they possess magical foresight and were just never wrong.
Right.
They are revered because they built systems to actively hunt for their own errors.
Charles Darwin is a fascinating example of this. The text mentions that Darwin spent decades gathering evidence before he finally published on the origin of species.
Decades.
And he didn't wait because he was lazy. He waited because he knew his ideas would be aggressively challenged by the church and by the scientific establishment. He actively anticipated being told he was wrong.
So he spent years aggressively trying to poke holes in his own theory first.
Exactly. He sought out falsifying data.
The superpower of science isn't that scientists are infallible beings who are immune to cognitive dissonance. It's that the entire institution of the scientific method expects human error, actively tests for it, and enforces course correction, regardless of anyone's feelings.
Even Einstein, right?
Yeah, Einstein willingly revised his own theories of relativity when the mathematics demanded it. He didn't just cling to his original draft because his ego was bruised.
But then the text asks us to imagine if our modern systems of leadership and governance functioned with that same humility.
And the contrast is just stark. I mean, imagine a politician standing at a podium during a debate and saying, here's my best understanding of the economic situation based on the data we have today. This is my conviction.
But if better evidence emerges tomorrow that proves this policy causes harm, I will abandon it and change my position.
Could you imagine?
In our current political climate, that person's career would be over by morning.
Instantly.
The opposition would label them weak. The media would call them a flip-flopper. Their own party would abandon them for being indecisive.
And that is the profound tragedy that the text highlights. The willingness to say, I will change my mind if the facts change, should be seen as the ultimate sign of intellectual integrity.
Right.
But our societal systems are engineered to punish that integrity. They reward absolute, unyielding certainty. They reward the loudest person in the room who never wavers, never expresses a single doubt, and never, ever admits a mistake, even as the ship is sinking.
So what does this all mean? I mean, this pulls the conversation far past the realm of just winning a debate at the dinner table.
Definitely.
As Maya points out in the dialogue, this inability to admit error isn't just an annoying personal quirk. It is a civilizational risk. When leaders are physically and psychologically incapable of saying I was wrong, the consequences cascade down to millions of people.
Yeah, the real-world impact is devastating.
Bad policies continue to drain economic resources long after they've proven completely ineffective. Wars drag on for years, sacrificing countless lives simply because the architects of the conflict refused to admit their initial intelligence was flawed.
And institutions continue to cause profound harm to marginalized groups long after the original utility of their systems has completely vanished.
Because no one wants to admit they were wrong.
Because society rewards blind stubbornness. And so we end up elevating leaders who are, as the text chillingly describes it, neurologically incapable of learning.
Neurologically incapable. That is a terrifying thought.
It is. They have spent their entire careers ignoring their brain's error detection system just to maintain an aura of absolute dominance. And the cost of that biological stubbornness is ultimately measured in human suffering.
Which brings us to the core distillation of this entire deep dive. The text argues that the most dangerous words in any language are, "I already know."
So true.
Because the moment you utter those words, you shut the door to the outside world, the learning just stops, curiosity is extinguished, and progress grinds to an absolute halt.
The author makes a profound philosophical point regarding those words, actually. They point out that the opposite of wisdom is not ignorance.
Oh, I loved this part.
Ignorance is simply a lack of information, right? Which can easily be cured. The opposite of wisdom is the refusal to learn, and that refusal begins the exact moment we decide we cannot bear to be wrong.
That completely upends our traditional understanding of intelligence. Like, true capability isn't about having all the answers. It's about your capacity to absorb new, contradictory information without suffering a total identity crisis.
Precisely.
And this brings us directly to you, the listener. Because the revolutionary idea at the heart of the time traveler's paradox is that looking a colleague, a partner, or even a child in the eye and saying, "I may be mistaken," is not an act of surrender.
Far from it.
It is an act of supreme strength. It proves that you value the pursuit of truth far more than you value the fragile comfort of your own ego. It really is the beginning of all genuine learning.
This raises an important question for us to consider as we close today. We know our biology is actively flooding our nervous system with stress hormones to prevent us from admitting fault.
Right, the hot stove.
And we've seen how our current institutions actively reward this stubborn, destructive certainty. So how do we begin to change this dynamic in our own lives?
How do we fight back?
We need to actively incentivize the people around us to change their minds. Imagine a completely different approach to how we evaluate potential. What would happen if, in your next job interview or, your annual performance review, instead of just handing over a highly polished, sanitized resume of your successes?
Which is what we all do.
Right. What if you proudly presented a resume of revised beliefs?
A resume of revised beliefs. That is fascinating.
What if you sat down with a hiring manager and said, "Here is a list of strategic concepts I was absolutely certain about 3 years ago. Here is the painful evidence that proved my convictions were entirely wrong. And here's exactly how I adapted and grew as a result of that failure."
Wow. It would completely reframe vulnerability.
It forces the environment to judge you on your adaptability and your intellectual honesty, rather than some impossible standard of perfection. It demands that we build relationships and institutions designed to detect and correct errors, rather than hide them in shame.
And if your own brain inherently treats being wrong as a mortal threat, what fundamental truths are you avoiding right now just to save yourself the pain? And what amazing things could happen if you finally decided to face them?